Hello everybody, and welcome back to the farm. Winter in central New York can be beautiful, but when you're more than halfway through, the only thing that any of us think about is what's coming in the spring. And for me, that includes bees. So I'd like to take you back with me to Memorial Day weekend of last year, 2024. It's 5:30 in the morning, and Megan and I are heading to beautiful Skaneateles, New York, to pick up some new bees. Of course, we stopped at Starbucks on the way, and then once we had our drinks in hand, we headed out to Aaron's property. Aaron is a beekeeper. I've purchased all of my bees from him over the last few years, and he lives on a beautiful piece of land. It has ponds, it has beehives, and Aaron himself is just an awesome guy. He has tons of these nucleus colonies that he sells to local central New York beekeepers. So as the sun rose above the trees on a beautiful Memorial Day weekend morning, I picked up my 2 new colonies of bees to take back to the farm with me. If you've never seen this process, or if you didn't catch my video last year when I did this, it's a really interesting process. You basically stick these boxes in the back of the truck, you ratchet strap them down so that the lid doesn't fly off, and then you head out for hopefully not too long of a trip, because this is kind of stressful for the bees. So we hopped back in the truck, but before heading back to the farm, we drove through the beautiful city of Skaneateles, New York. If you ever get the opportunity, I highly recommend that you make it out this way. There's a ton of really nice shops, really cool, quaint stuff. There's a bunch of great restaurants. It's a really nice environment. Just the entire town has a nice vibe. And it's right on a lake. And the lake is crystal clear. You could see the bottom, whether it's 2 feet deep or 10 feet deep. It's perfectly clear. So, a nice place to stop if you're heading through the area. Now, for me, we have about an hour and a half to a 2-hour trip back to the farm. And like I said, a car ride is pretty stressful on bees, and they usually escape the box a little bit and cling to the edge. So after a 10-minute jaunt through town over here, we figured it was time to head back. And just like that, we're back at the farm. So unloading the bees is the exact opposite of what you saw when we loaded them. But we noticed something. There were a lot of bees flying around. And sure enough, they got out of the corner of the box and they started clinging to the sides. So although I was trying to be gentle when taking this ratchet strap off, I noticed that there were a lot of bees flying around, and all of a sudden a huge cloud of bees formed. So we got the protective gear on and continued on with removing the ratchet strap. Next up was very slowly and carefully removing the box from the bed of my truck, because there were lots of live bees clinging to the boxes and flying around. Nobody wants dead or squished bees. And then Megan and I loaded everything into that nice big cart that I bought and assembled last year that came from Harbor Freight. This thing's coming in very handy. It holds a lot of stuff, and it's the perfect cart for bringing things back to the beehives. We ended up having to make a couple trips because there was just too much stuff to keep on the cart. Stuff kept falling over. So we made the walk all the way to the back with 1 load of stuff, and then we brought the next load of stuff. By the time we made it back to the beehives to actually start doing some work and giving these new bees a permanent home by my pond, it was about 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning on this Memorial Day weekend, and it was a beautiful morning. The sun was out, it was about 60 degrees, and it was a great day to rehome some bees. And look at these beehives. They came out great. You could see the detail on the ones that I just painted and assembled, and my original beehive is still doing well. It's a little bit dirty, but bees are still coming and going. And now the stars of the show, the new bees that we just purchased in Skaneateles. And it's time to take apart the hives that we just set up. first step is to take the lids off and to remove all of those frames that you saw being built in a video just a couple weeks ago. They all have to come out, and that makes room for all of the new frames, which contain all of the bees that we just bought. Those new frames go into this hive box, and then with whatever space is remaining, these newly constructed frames are then put back in. Under the proper conditions, in a couple weeks, the bees will expand into those empty frames and they'll build their colony. So here we go. Time to rehome the bees. Once that lid is taken off, it's kind of a moment of panic because suddenly thousands of bees form a cloud around you. So what's going to happen here in the video is a full-length, uncut video showing the rehoming of these two boxes. They only take about 3 or 4 minutes each, but you have to do them very carefully because, like I just said a few minutes ago, nobody wants dead or squished bees. So once you take out a frame from the box that we purchased, it has to be put into the hive in a very specific order. You can't mix these up because it messes with the bees' sense of direction and what they're doing in their colony. So when you take one out of the left side of the box, it goes into the hive in that same position. Then you take the next one out and you put it right next to that original one. This is an interesting process because as you pull those frames out of the box, you have a chance to look at what each of those frames is doing. Each frame does something different. Some of those frames are honey storage. Some of them are brood frames where the bees are laying the eggs. And there's other things that occur on these frames. So as you see them, they might look slightly different from one another, and that's because they are different from one another. Another challenge is to try and identify the queen, because all of the bees will eventually congregate on the queen. And the hope is that the queen is on one of these frames, so that when you put the frame in the hive, all of the bees find their way into the hive. In this particular case, the queen is in the lid of the box. She's very large in comparison to the other bees, and I saw her immediately when I opened the lid of the box and I saw all of the bees in there. So very rapidly I'm going to have to shake those bees into the hive. Otherwise, all of the bees are going to come out of the hive and find their way over to the box lid where the queen is. So once all of the frames are in the hive, it's just a matter of very gently pushing the frames together, not squishing the bees, but making room for some of those newly constructed frames, because those all have to go in. Once those are in, the process is almost over. The last step is to empty all of these remaining bees into that hive. So right here I'm watching the queen, seeing what she's doing. It's just interesting watching the bees do their thing. In the cover of these boxes and in the box themselves, you will often find honeycomb or propolis or a variety of other byproducts of bees and their beehives. And that's the case in the lid that I'm still looking at. There's a lot of honeycomb up there, there's structures, and all of that stuff is going to be dumped into the hive. And it's not really a gentle process. You want to kind of give them a sharp whap onto the beehive, and they all just kind of drop down. And there we go. So at this point I'm looking at the lid, making sure that the queen is indeed gone, and she was. She's somewhere down in the hive now. And then the same thing happens for this box. There's hundreds of bees still left over in the box, and they all have to be removed and find their way into the hive. So as you continue to watch this process, just a little bit about these boxes. I save the boxes, but what I do immediately after rehoming the bees is I leave the boxes on the ground in front of the beehive for 3 or 4 days. There's still bees left in that box, and there's also still bees that find their way back into that box. So giving the bees a time to find their hive and to congregate around the queen is important. We don't want to bring any honeybees back home with us. We want to leave them where they belong in their colony. So now here we go, same exact process with the second hive. I bought 2 of these nucleuses, 2 bee colonies, 2 boxes of bees, and each box goes into its own hive. So now I will have 3 fully populated hives and hopefully a lot of honey this year. Nothing changes here. You can see that the frame right in front of you is fully filled with honey. It's a pretty heavy frame. Each frame goes back into the hive in the exact same orientation that you pull it out of the box. And there's a little bit of gentle nudging that takes place here and there to move bees that are connected to the shoulders or the tops of the frames. There's also some delicacy in putting these things down into the hive because you don't want to kill any of the bees in the process. There's a bunch of stuff in the cart here, including the screen that goes onto the top of one of these hives between the hive and the lid to keep bees from going up into the lid. I have a bag full of beekeeping tools, smoker and all that kind of stuff. And I also have a decorative flag for my bee area that my mom purchased for me. So I'm going to hang that up shortly as well. But here we go, the last frame. That is the final nucleus frame that I purchased on this Memorial Day weekend in 2024. Now filling out the process of this hive is putting those newly constructed frames in, just like we did in the first place. And then we're going to tidy everything up and complete the process. My favorite part is coming up. That is knocking all of the bees out of the lid and out of the box. And bees will now find their new home, just like that. That queen for that second hive is down in one of those frames. So it should be a matter of an hour before all of those bees are in their respective hives around their respective queens, doing their bee things. There's a ton of bees flying around me right now, and many of them are naturally in attack mode. This is a very stressful process for the bees, and I'm very thankful for this bee suit. I've seen people do this without bee suits, and I don't really mind getting stung by bees. It's not a favorite thing, but I'm not scared of it by any means. But I still would not want to do this without the bee suit. So the screen goes on the top of that hive, and then the roof goes on. Now you'll notice that there are hive boxes missing at this stage, and that's intentional. You don't put the other boxes on for a period of time after you put the bees into their new home. They have to expand their colony, and once they expand it by a certain percentage, then at that point you put on the honey supers, and then they could do the next part of their process. So at this point I'm putting little bits and bobbles onto the hive like the entrance reducer and various other things. Not that they're necessarily needed right now, just more to get them out of the little cart that I have and to get them where they belong. So now this hive doesn't have a screen that goes on top, rather it has this top plate, and the top plate provides a little bit of ventilation in there, and it keeps the bees in the hive. And then atop this plate goes the tin covered roof or cap. And there you have it. That's the process for rehoming bee nucleuses. So we're not done though. There's other things that I want to do today while we're here. So I mentioned this flag. It's always nice to add a little bit of decoration. I placed it right at the top of the small hill leading down to the beehives. I do have to come in and cut down some of the ferns that you see that are in the walkway. And then I also want to feed the bees. There's a couple different ways to feed bees. One way is with a solution of sugar and water. The other way is through pollen patties, and that's what you see here. These are by a company called Global Patties, and they're basically pressed pollen with some other things, and they're just rectangles of this gelatinous material in between paper, and these get laid right as you see them, right atop the frames. So they are paper lined, and the bees will actually process the paper as well, so you don't have to remove the paper. Now by process, they may eat the paper, they may convert it into some other raw material that they use. I don't exactly know how they process the paper. Like I said, you just plop it on top of the frame, cover it back up, put the roof on, and then the bees will eat that. So I do this every maybe 3 weeks. Sometimes the bees, when they're very active, they will eat that patty in a matter of days. Sometimes I've come back 3 weeks later and there's still half a patty left. So if that patty's gone, I'll just feed them another one. So at this point, we're essentially done. It's just cleanup. You saw that I flipped over those cardboard boxes, and that's just to prevent rainwater from pooling up in them over the next few days if it rains. But the purpose is to get the bees out of those boxes, give them time to find their way into the hive, and go around the queen. So I would consider this a very successful Bee Day 2024 here in central New York. Megan had a blast, she helped out. There were no screams of terror this year, she didn't get stung, she didn't go running away, so that's always a good sign. And I had a great time too. I love doing this. I love giving the bees a new home. I love the area that they're located in the farm, and I can't wait for spring of 2025 to get here, and we're going to see even more bees. So that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the process of how to rehome honeybees and where they're located on my farm and what my setup is for the honeybees. There's a lot more to come. We're about to plant the field. So I hope you'll stay with me, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.